The biggest challenge we have in that sort of due diligence period between getting your finance and getting a contract to become unconditional is a building inspection report. They are sometimes a little bit too onerous outside the scope of the clause, and they can frighten people effectively. There's actually nothing wrong with the property, but it's convincing people that they aren't structural issues, that they are outside the scope of the clause.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
Hey, Paul, really excited to be diving into a topic that's not really covered on many podcasts before. So excited to have you along.
Thanks for having me.
So give us a bit of background on yourself and how did you end up in settlements? Because everyone sort of doesn't wake up, doesn't go to school and think, oh, I'm going to become a settlement agent when I get older. It's a bit like a real estate agent. You all sort of don't head out and intend to be in this role, but find it somehow. And how did you find settlements?
Yeah, pretty much by accident, literally. I had left school and didn't kind of know what I was doing. So I took a inverted commas gap year from uni, and I was actually just tearing around the city, being a push bike courier, actually, trying to just keep fit because I was training for sort of triathlons and things I was doing, and actually got hit by a car. And while I was pondering that injury and lying around, I bumped into a mate who was doing some outside work for a law firm. He goes, "You should just give this a go." So I just happened to find an outside clerk job at a settlement agency and started doing the outside work there as a bit of a thing, and ultimately spent 13 years in that place. Before then just opening up my own agency in 2006. Literally by accident. I didn't know couldn't even tell you what a settlement agent was when I first started, and just learnt it from the get-go.
So what does a settlement agent actually do in their role?
Yeah, sure.
Just thinks, surely you just plug it into a computer and it happens all by itself.
Yeah, totally. We wish it was that simple, but ultimately, in a nutshell, a settlement agent role is to facilitate the change in title. So acting for either a buyer or a seller or both. We prepare, the legal documentation, if you like, to facilitate the change on the land title at the land titles office. So we liaise directly with the client's banks, whether it be the discharging bank or new mortgage bank, other settlement agents, real estate agents, of course, to facilitate that change. So in a perfect world, it's preparing some documents, lodging at land gate, and everyone moves on. So, but in a nutshell, that's what we do.
So how long do you find that settlements typically take? Because I have my perception as a selling agent, but you'd probably have seen things with all ranges of people's circumstances.
Of course, yeah. So I guess typically settlement is roughly around a 6-week sort of period we sort of look at. So on a general rule, we would see, a contract come in where it's accepted on a particular date, and the buyers have a 21-day period to sort of get their finance in place and things like that, do their sort of due diligence, like building inspection reports and timber pest reports and things like that.
Well, most of those are done within 7 days of acceptance or within 7 days of finance, because I know I write mine to be after finance, so buyers can get their finance and then not outlay for the reports beforehand. But I've always done that, but I've never really known what's the norm.
No, yours probably the norm. So, but it can vary. We can certainly have them where they get them, 14 days to get their inspections and things done, and then 21 days for their finance. So some buyers are particular and they like to know the information before they get their finance approved. But others, like you said, they don't particularly like outlaying the money if they're not even going to get their finance. So I guess nowadays we're sort of seeing people who are almost pre-approved anyway, aren't they? So they kind of got that sort of information in the bag pretty much before those inspections and things are being done. Yeah. So, and then typically from that date, we're looking at roughly a sort of 21, 28 day sort of turnaround for settlement. So we can do our job, I guess, effectively, do some more inquiries for the clients. And so anyway, typically from 5 to 7 sort of weeks for a settlement. Yeah.
And how quick have you seen finance periods come together in a few years? So, and how long have some of them been?
Yeah. Some of them in eternity. So in this office, we deal with a lot of first home buyers who are building. So, they have to go through savings plans and things like that with their builder and lender. So they have sometimes up to 3-4 months to get their finance in place. And, typically we can get finance approvals within sort of a few days. So if a buyer, I guess, is pre-approved in essence, then we sort of get this, so long as they're approved within a certain sort of LVR to the bank, they can get their approvals pretty much within a few days. So, and that starts the ball rolling, starts that settlement date ticking. So yeah, it can happen quickly, but like I said, we still have deals that are sitting in our office from 12 months ago, which are still waiting on finance. They get extensions and things like that, pending what they're sort of doing. Yeah.
Okay. And if someone's paying cash, what is the usual period, and how quick would someone make it if they had genuine cash in their account ready to go? So I am seeing a lot more cash deals this year. I think I've sold to 10 odd buyers that are cash out of 40 odd buyers I've sold so far this year, or maybe 50 odd buyers. And usually in a year, I might only see 1 or 2 cash. So there's a lot more cash floating around. Are you seeing that to be the case as well?
Yeah, definitely. Perth seeing a lot of, as you've probably seen as well, Jared, like a lot of eastern state investors who are popping in and seeing our markets looking pretty good. So cashed up literally and come in and buy up. So yeah, a cash settlement. Ultimately, especially if it's a clear title, so if the current owner doesn't have a mortgage on the property, and you can do a settlement literally nowadays in 2 or 3 days if you really needed to, but bearing in mind that the buyer can't.
The seller's situation, could slow things up if they've got a loan.
Yeah, we can't get due diligence done and do our inquiries with local councils and things like that we specifically do for buyers. So yeah, it can be done. It can be done very, very quickly, but even with cash buyers, we sort of suggest to them maybe at least 14 days, and that too in itself is actually still quite a quick settlement turnaround. So yeah.
I tend to write my cash offers up at 30 days, and that seems to be a good balancing act.
Absolutely, yes, please. If you can continue to do that, that would be wonderful. That's right. Yeah.
So, how can a settlement agent actually ensure a smooth process? Because I've dealt with hundreds of settlement agents over the years, and you kind of take smooth for granted until you've got a bad one, and then it's anything but. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's getting in touch with the clients pretty early in the piece. Ultimately, that's kind of where we as an office certainly try and keep it running smoothly as possible, is speaking with the clients very early in the piece to make sure they've got all their ducks in a row before even a contract goes unconditional, for example. So if a client's selling a property, make sure that, have they got a bank involved? Are they discharging a loan? Have they got certain compliance in place? So as you know, there's certain things they have to have in place, like RCDs and hardwired smoke alarms and things like that. Ensuring those things are under control at the time. A buyer, to make sure that they're on to the conditions that are set out in the contract, to make sure that they're booking their building inspections or their termite inspections, and liaising with the agent to make sure that they can get someone in to do those things, etc. So yeah, just making sure each of the client are meeting their contractual obligations. Another thing that pops up for a seller, for example, depending on the sale price of a property, they're required to get ATO clearances and things like that. So the ATO can take anywhere from 1 to 30 days to get one of those compliance certificates to us. So we try and get onto that quite early if we can. If the agent hasn't done it from the get-go, then we certainly try and get those things out of the way, and so they're not at a last-minute rush when it comes time to getting closer to settlement date and we're still chasing these things. Yeah.
And I guess if someone's overseas, that can be a bit more complicated as well.
Yes, we love it when they're overseas.
I always get it. It's like, oh, Jared, I'm thinking of taking a holiday. Is it going to be a problem? And I'm always like looking at the exact dates relative to our sale contract and being like,
Yes. Yeah. Half their life they're going overseas, especially people buying. I love it when they're buying a house and then going overseas. I'd be a joy that I'm spending all this money and
cash is just going out everywhere.
Yeah. Just, while I'm spending money, I may as well just keep spending it. So yeah, that's certainly a reality of making sure things run smoothly, because if they are going away, and in WA, I guess predominantly we've got a big FIFO workforce, right? So it's just even checking that. It's almost a generic question now. Hey, is FIFO? Because or clients even more obliged to even tell us nowadays that, I'm away, I'm not, I'm not in for that swing and things like that. So yeah, we've got to be mindful that they're around so they can sign some documentation or complete some identity checks and things that we need before they go away. So, because the last thing we need is them to be either overseas or on a work site somewhere where they can't get access to signing documents. Because unfortunately, we still use pens in our...
You still use pens?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
we do.
When do you think that may move to being digital? Do you have it? Is that even on the radar for, Landgate, etc.?
Yeah, definitely.
At least the banks have mainly moved their documentation to being digital now, thankfully. COVID got them there finally.
Yes, they are. They are almost there, the banks. So 99.9% of their documentation is digital, and they can accept DocuSign documents. But a new mortgage still, for example, in WA, just so everyone out there knows, they still require an original signature on a document and return to them before they can settle. So yeah, clients will get their documents remotely or online, I should say, and sign them via DocuSign, but they'll be asked specifically to return an original version to their bank. So yeah, they still need a pen. With us, we send the majority of our documents out electronically to clients and can accept, electronic documents back, but there's still certain verification of documents, ID and things that we still need in reality. But there's times when a settlement can't settle electronically. It has to be in paper, like old school. And that's when the pen comes out and documents need to be signed with wet signatures, as we call it.
So is that to do with how the title is, or what sort of requires that? So
yeah, there's certain documentation that still can't be accepted in the electronic workspace. For example, a deceased estate. So if there's an executor on a title, effectively the way the electronic workspace works is if it can't be stamped for stamp duty purposes in state revenue, then it can't be acknowledged in the PEXA/electronic workspace that we operate out of. So there's certain documentations that still we can't get on there. They're working on it. There's over East, they've got more documentation that's acceptable, but that is the prime example where we see that we know straight away that it won't settle electronically and it'll go back to old school sort of settlements.
So what are some of the common challenges or issues that you see that can arise during that process, and how do you potentially handle them as they come up?
Yeah, I feel the biggest challenge we have in that sort of due diligence period between, getting finance and getting a contract to become unconditional is a building inspection report. As a rule of thumb, as you've probably seen, they are sometimes a little bit too onerous outside the scope of the clause, and they can frighten people effectively. They buy a house and they get this list of things that are, inverted commas, wrong with it. There's actually nothing wrong with the property, but it's convincing people that they aren't structural issues, that they are outside the scope of the clause and it's not the intention of the clause and things like that. So we feel that is one of the biggest bugbears or time-consuming sort of side effects of settlements at the minute, is dealing with those and communicating with clients that it's not all bad, or if they are bad, help them, I guess, if you like, get through that process and give them what we should be concerned about, or if they are a real problem, to help them through that process. And we have to issue certain paperwork to the other agents to make a claim effectively to say, please fix it. Yeah, it's a sort of standard defect notice is the term we use. So there's certain things that we have to put out there, but at times it's convincing, sometimes buyers in particular, that those inspections aren't as bad as they look. Yeah, so that's the challenge.
Funnily enough, I had my other really good friend, Paul Antonelli from ResiCert, on the show last episode. So people can go back and listen to that one and hear his take on things. It was pretty interesting chat. So
yeah, sure.
And you would have seen, as well as I have, the types of inspection reports and how some of them can be really complicated and difficult to read, and whereas others, like theirs, are very simple and show clearly how things are classified and what is to be concerned about. So, but then with the other end of the spectrum, it can be very complicated.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's some of them we see reports that are 80 pages long. One page is all we're looking for that actually has a summary of what's actually going on, and the rest is, it's almost scaremongering just about. I feel sorry for buyers sometimes. They must really panic. I had sellers who panic when they see them. They come through and they think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my house? Whereas in reality, there's nothing actually really wrong with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess every property has some maintenance and other things, and it's a case of being aware of it and knowing what you need to do or not need to do.
I agree. Yeah, in a way, it's kind of good that the buyers are aware that there's some sort of maintenance issues, but in effect, but explaining to them that it's outside the scope of a contract, it can sometimes be a bit of a challenge for sure.
So, what are the types of documents and paperwork that you typically see involved? Because you touched on a few of them there, but the average person that's listening that hasn't done a settlement then might not yet know. So,
yeah, sure. So we have to meet certain obligations under our Act to ensure that we have permission to act for someone. So we have certain appointments, a client authorization form, for example. So an appointment to settlement agent starts giving us permission to sort of do everything for them. Client authorization allows us to settle in the electronic workspace and sort of confirms we've done a bit of an ID check for these buyers or sellers.
That's been a big change for everyone, I guess. I haven't seen any other Nigerians selling properties since the two that they sold a few years back that prompted all of these ID checks.
Correct. Rob did all that in the first instance. Yeah, exactly. So, fingers crossed they can take their efforts somewhere else and, use their powers for good.
No shortage with other scams going on, but
oh gosh, everywhere we turn, right? It's and no doubt we'll touch on that later. It's so other typical documentation, so ATO clearances as I touched on before. So if a seller is selling a property for over $750,000 is the magic number, they're required to get an ATO clearance to ensure that they're not ducking off overseas and taking their money with them and not lodging a tax return and things like that. So it's effectively advising the ATO that they're not sort of foreign owners and they would, not ducking off with all their money and not lodging tax returns in Australia. So some other things for buyers, we have to confirm they're not foreign for stamp duty purposes. So if there's a foreign buyer in there, they actually have quite an onerous additional amount of stamp duty to pay. It's actually 7% of the purchase price on top of their normal stamp duty amount. So it can be quite expensive. So that's something we have to sort of be mindful of. Other documents, verification of identity, which I touched on, discharges the mortgage. So we advise, we get the clients to speak with their bank to sign sort of their necessary documentation with their bank to release the mortgage off their title. What's called an electrical safety certificate. As you know, Jared, properties have to comply with RCD and hardwired smoke alarm legislation as well, which is a great thing. But there's a specific sort of certificate that an electrician can issue, and we like to see them. Sellers don't have to have them. They can sign a declaration to confirm that the property complies. But in a perfect world, we'd love to see an electrical safety certificate. So that's a bit of a review of the sort of documents we get from people.
Yeah. Okay. So when it actually comes to doing some due diligence, and what do you kind of look into, and as far as you check scope for a buyer, more so when you're representing them?
That's right. Yeah. So for a buyer in particular, it's obviously reviewing their building inspection reports and timber pest reports if they sort of get those in. So certainly they're being done almost sometimes before we even see a contract, but during that sort of period, so that's something we look at. When a property goes unconditional, we do inquiries with local council, water corp, town planning to get effectively what's called orders and requisitions from council. So the council will send us, in particular, that's probably the bigger one, the most important one we sort of get for a buyer. Councils will give us indications whether there's been building licenses issued on the property, tells us whether or not there are all safety compliance issues, whether there's any orders against the property effectively. So there could be a health order against the property along those kind of lines, but more particularly building licensing issues that we're sort of looking at. So a client might know that the property has been renovated, for example, or an extension has been done. So has that been approved? Has a nice, amazing patio or pergola that's been attached to the back of the house? Is that actually an approved structure? Things like that. So we do that kind of due diligence for the buyer as well and present that to them, so they're either comfortable in the notion that it actually is approved or get an understanding of what they're sort of getting. That's probably the most important sort of one we do for a client. The water corp, it's generally effectively providing information as to where their sewer line runs, strangely enough. So where it connects to the property, that's probably a bit more important for people who might be buying a property where they're going to subdivide it down the track, for example, or maybe have the idea of knocking this house over and building something new. Where does the sewer line run? Can I build in a certain part? Might be a sort of connection point, if you like, on the property, and it might show where that is. So it just gives them an indication of that, more particularly.
Yeah. And what happens if the seller does have outstanding debts or other things registered against the title, or even not registered against the title? How does that all dealt with? Because, some sellers that are forced to sell probably do have a few things in the background that, the buyer's still going to be able to get their property they've bought with these things exist.
Yeah, they certainly, that's certainly our job to make sure that they're all paid out effectively. So again, as part of those inquiries with Water Corporation and local council, etc., they do give us rating information on that property, whether there's any big outstanding debt, which we have seen in the past, absolutely.
Strata fees is probably another one that comes up a bit.
I'm sorry, which one?
Strata fees.
Strata fees, yes. Yeah, there's plenty of those. So they are an issue if a seller might be selling under a bit of duress and may not have paid their rates for quite some time. So that information does come through to us from those authorities, and for sure that is our requirement. We're acting for both buyer or seller, so either way, it is determined that those are paid out. It's actually a requirement that it's all cleared at the time of settlement, and they're all paid out. And the new buyer gets a nice clean slate.
So have you got any recent experiences that come to mind where, you feel like you've made a difference over, another settlement agent that might just be not as involved, or do you try to prevent the things from occurring before they get to that place?
Yeah, we certainly, it's the joys of having really good staff. They get onto these type of things really quickly, and anything that might arise or show its face quite early in the piece, they're onto it very, very quickly. But I guess, and that's part of, being around for a while, you sort of manage those things as quickly as possible. From a personal experience or a settlement that I think I've made a difference anyway in the process, would be probably the biggest settlement I was involved in, which was again, a bit of my background is I do a lot of land development sort of work for land developers in Perth, and one of my clients was they acquired it was about 20 separate properties that they were then obviously amalgamating to create a land subdivision, but that involved a settlement process that was clearly 20 different settlement agents, 20 separate banks in the background. They were also going into a joint venture with another entity that came in behind it to acquire all that land. And so, a typical settlement, paper settlement in the city that we run around and run up and down the terrace to do would take about 15 minutes. This one took about 3.5 hours, where you're literally checking documents, checking your monies, making sure everyone's happy. So with that amount of people in one room, it can be quite complicated. So I guess attention and effort in the lead up to that, it was to make sure that there was no glitch on the particular day. That's probably my claim to fame, as to where effort and support from staff and really sort of staying on top of those type of things comes to the fore, where you can, just go over and above just a little bit more and have the opportunity to do a settlement like that, which is just not normal. So my claim to fame.
More interesting, better in the cat.
Yeah, that's right, than doing your vanilla one.
Well, I thought I'd also chat to you about some of your experiences to finish up investing in property and what has been some of the good and bad as well, because I know you love property through and through and have had various experiences over the years. So
definitely had various experiences, some really good, some not so great. So typically, I guess, of any investment that you do, whether it be in real estate or the stock market, whatever it turns out, they don't always work. Have had subdivision process myself that was interesting. So I see it all the time with my bigger developers, of course, but to actually jump on and do a subdivision, typical mum and dad subdivision where it was a vacant block and we split it in half and sold off 2 separate lots, sounds really simple. Processing is it's out of this world. How they do it on the magnitude of a 400 lot subdivision is just beyond me. And that's why they have massive teams behind them. So that was a great experience to do, and a successful one for my family, which was really, really good. So,
but do you think it'll be easier the next time if you do it, now that you've rolled the...
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess absolutely. But with always the joys of contacts in the industry, right? So having good relations with real estate agents, property surveyors, developers, and things like that. By maintaining those good relationships, they're always only a phone call away when you're when you're into those kind of scenarios. And people such as yourself, I'm particularly thinking of buying in this area. What are your thoughts? And yeah, so if I wasn't a super nice human, you probably wouldn't give me much of your time. So hopefully, having those kind of relationships is really good for going down the investment path. But yeah, certainly a failure. I'll call it a failure because we, lost money, and that's what it's all about, right? Is my family and I, we bought a property in Queensland, and all romantic thoughts of buying this little old house that we're going to renovate or knock down, and that was, if people remember, there was massive floods in Queensland.
I had a property caught up in those as well. So
yeah, and we bought it just before those floods, and having all these due diligence being done on construction of a new home or extending it and things, and those floods didn't actually affect my house as such.
Yeah, this is what happened to me too.
It was, but I'm talking a street away was underwater. Then we got to a point where, okay, we'll still investigate this new construction, but the banks just did not value it well because of its postcode. They were literally valuing postcodes at the time. And they go, nah, sorry, that one was underwater. So that's, it's a risk and we just don't want to touch it. And it was just getting out of control. So, and the house was old, and we knew that when we bought it, and it needed a lot of attention. So
cash flow drain then.
It was. So bit the bullet and just took the hit and moved on. Yeah, which happens. But yeah, there's been a couple of success stories as well, which is, outweighs the not so good ones.
And hopefully for us, for property owners, everything's looking very good. What's your take on market? It's probably another good place to finish on, because you see the sentiment of people, you see the sort of number of transactions, you get a feel for things from that point of view. Yeah, what's your take on where things are at now and where you think they might be heading?
Sure. I think, as I tell one of my staff, I clearly got it wrong. She went off on maternity leave, and I think the market's going to soften. This was just before interest rates were going to rise and all that kind of thing. And
well, I don't need to laugh, because there's no harm in disclosing that my wife, Karina, does work.
Is that human?
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, good. So she, wonderful as she is, went off on maternity leave. And I was like, no, we'll be okay. The market will soften because interest rates are going through the roof, and the press was all over it, scaring everyone. And wow, was I so far wrong. The market is super strong in Perth. I actually don't see that changing too much, because we have a supply issue. As you know, Jared, if you can get a listing, you're doing pretty well as a real estate agent now. I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge they've got. I'll sell it if you give it to me, but it's so I think ultimately we just, typical basic economics, right? Supply and demand. Demand is still super high, but supply is pretty low. So, and I would be not liking trying to rent a property at the minute. So that too affects the desire for people to go, well, I'll go and buy something, or I'll go and build something. And we're seeing both sides of that coin because of our links to land developers. So yeah, people are still building. You see these horror stories in the press, builders falling, collapsing, and who would want to build at this time? There's no trades, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't see that. It's not from my desk anyway. So because of that pressure on rental market and things like that, people just going, well, I need to make that decision I'll go and buy something. And yeah, properties are turning over real quick. The sale times are all based on this pressure, I think, of supply and demand. Yeah, I think WA, I haven't seen the actual numbers, but I still think our migration is still quite high. So the pressure on supply is still there. So, I guess again in basic economics, that's the basis of putting a floor on those values, isn't it? So I think our market's still strong for a while yet.
And are you seeing many transactions from apartments or villas and smaller properties with affordability pushing people towards that end of the market yet, or is it still just sort of steady as it goes? Because I'm still finding some are pretty difficult to sell, but then ones that have a little bit more land component, like the villa versus the apartment, I'm starting to see a bit more heat around those and more people coming and selling those properties that have been wanting to for a while because their values are returning back.
Yeah, I agree. I think if there's still that little bit of a land component, I'm seeing that just literally with a deal that's just come through across my desk. Yesterday, as a repeat client, they had a little investment unit they had in Inaloo, and that had a nice, it's a great little spot, and they sold it close to $100,000 over their expectation because there's that kind of pressure in that sort of pocket, and it was a great little unit. But still had that little bit of a land component. We don't see much, I guess, your generic apartment sort of complexes, I guess, running out the door. But I think still, if it's probably typical of Australians, isn't it? We still want our little pocket of dirt. So they're still going pretty strong for sure.
But it's certainly very backward compared to Sydney and Melbourne. You don't get much for your money over there, and I guess that's why a lot of people are coming here as well.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And I guess, from a migration point of view, but also an investment point of view, and certainly Eastern State investors are seeing pretty good value for money here for $500,000. They're just going, I have two, thanks. It's kind of, they just can't believe it.
And that's another point that I thought I'd ask you on. With the investors, I released an episode, a couple of episodes back, that why are locals either late to the party or leaving the party? Would you say that's what you're seeing as well? A lot of them are selling out. They're sort of sick of having their investment properties for various reasons, and most of the people that are buying are actually East Coasters, not locals.
Yes, definitely seeing that. We're seeing big influx of Eastern State investors for sure, and I think it's purely because of they've got to see value in it. They're sort of buyers agent sort of parties, I guess, over east who are even looking for these people, and even within our land development side of things, there's a lot of the construction that's going on as well. These Eastern State investors who are jumping on board and building in these estates, try and get onto this market pretty hot, and they can depreciate things in a newer property environment as well. So they definitely see value here for sure, and they're generally cashed up, so they probably beat some of the locals to the party as well. So if I'm selling my house and someone offers me a cash offer and they're from over east, I'm not overly really concerned really as a seller. You just want to see the coin, and if you're prepared to pay it, I'm prepared to sell it to you. Yeah.
On that final note, how many buyers would you say make what it's a cash offer, so not conditional upon finance, but are still using finance? How often do you see that this being the case? It can be more tempting for a seller when they get a cash offer without those conditions, but then obviously the risk falls on the buyer to actually get their finance and still complete. And I myself, and we've had to, when you miss out on a few to a cash offer, I've made the choice of making sure my finance is ready to fully go, and taking that risk where, you may lose your deposit if it doesn't proceed. But I just thought I'd see how commonplace it actually is.
Yeah, I don't see it too much. I think if they're legitimately cash, we're okay with it, and see that they are cash. We have the odd one where definitely no, they're not, and they probably had no intention of ever being cash. So, but I'd like to think that they have done some very good due diligence, such as yourself, Jared.
Yeah, certainly on the riskier end of the purchase, and
it's a very riskier side of things. Yeah, we certainly, if any client ever discussing that scenario, we certainly advise them that there's a lot of risk involved, obviously, and you are really committing yourself to. Yeah, that's right. Good as I say, not as I do. Yeah.
I guess it's always a case of weighing it up, isn't it? Because your deposit is on the line, and it certainly makes me nervous. But I just weigh up.
I'm sure it makes Karina nervous too, mate.
Yeah.
You can get yourself in trouble for that.
Yeah, well, I just have to get her to close her eyes and accept.
Just sign here, please. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess when you miss out on a few and you see prices going up, you just got to weigh up that. Just can be aware of it, not just think, it's a case of being aware of the risk, isn't it?
Absolutely. For sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. went through a few other areas there that I wasn't planning to, but yeah, your wealth of knowledge on what's happening. So really appreciate it.
Awesome. No worries. Thank you so much.
See you, mate.
Take care. See ya.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.